And welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us on this Tools and Techniques Thursday, today hosted by IBS SA Durban region, and very thrilled to have our president of the IBA South African chapter taking today's session. So welcome to Edward Ngobani. Like I mentioned, he is the current president of our IB South Africa chapter and also a head of business analysis at DVT. He's been in the IT industry for over 20 years. And during this period, he has worked as a systems developer, a systems analyst, a business analyst manager, head of PMO, a practice lead, and a head of business analysis. So he's really got a full spectrum of coverage when it comes to analysts and business analysts. So he has set up and run business analyst COPs, and he's developed and mentored several business analysts. And Edward holds 5 degrees, 2 of which are master's level. He has also an MBA, cum laude, and both from the University of the Witwatersrand. And over the years, he's received many awards, both as an employee as well as in leadership. He's passionate about business analysis and has written articles on this discipline, published in the Modern Analyst and also in itweb.co.za. And he has been on the IIB South Africa chapter board of directors for the past 4 years. So we've been thrilled to have him there. And he is in 3rd year of PhD in business management, currently studying at the University of Witwatersrand. His thesis is Cloud Computing Adoption, SMME Development in South Africa. So very pertinent. And he's also a certified leadership coach. So not only those 5 degrees, he's also a certified leadership coach, holding a leadership coaching certificate from the University of the Witwatersrand. And in April 2021, he was appointed as a supervisor to the students who are on the Masters in Digital Business program at the university too. So yes, we are very thrilled tonight as the Durban chapter to have Edward presenting on our behalf. And yes, thank you very much. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy this presentation on using DSDM, that's Dynamic Systems Development Method, to complement your Scrum and Agile and business analysis. So before we get started, just to give you an introduction to the IIBA, for those who don't know it, and also just for the presentation, just some quick rules. Stay on mute if you can, please, for the presentation, unless we're clear to talk during a question session. If you can switch off your video, only the presenter's video is allowed, just to help us all here in South Africa with our bandwidth. The presentation is about 45 minutes long. There'll be time for questions in that time. And feel free, as we're going along, to post questions in the main chat. And we'll read them to the presenter when it comes to the Q&A. This presentation will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We don't send out the presentation deck, but you will have the full presentation and available on the YouTube channel. And then just a reminder to become a member of the IIBA. I'll send out all these links, but go to the IIBA Business Analysis and there's membership there, and you can have a look at individual memberships. Otherwise, if you're in a big company, you can encourage your company to join as a company. And then for our next event, you know where to find us, because you found us today. That's at IIBA.org/events. And then if you yourself would like to join us for a Tools and Techniques and be a presenter, we'd love to have you on board. So give us a contact at durban@southafrica.iiba.org. And just, yes, thank you again for joining us today. And apologize for that slight delay, but I'm sure it'll be worth what's up next that Edward will be presenting to you. And just excuse us, I'm going to be doing the slides from my side, and Edward's going to just tell me when to move on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I must say I'm flying blind, because I can't see anything, but we'll get going, and we'll probably, spend the whole hour and make this thing work. So I wanted to talk to you, or I want to talk to you about the DSDM as something that I'm finding quite interesting now of late, and some that I thought, let me share with you. Some of you might know it, some of you might be hearing it for the first time today. Some of you might actually be practicing DSDM without realizing. So let's get straight into it. Ruth, if you can go to the next slide, please. I wish I was driving. I always like to be in control, but unfortunately, it is what it is. So the acknowledgements, I just want to make sure that I let you guys know that these are the references that I used in preparing for this presentation. I strongly advise you, if you want to read more on this or on the subject and what I'm going to talk about, there you go. These are the sources that you can find, but I'm sure once I've spoken to you about it, you might find it quite interesting and want to go and read more about it here. Next slide, please. So just to make sure that we all on the same page, by DSDM, we mean Dynamic Systems Development Method, just to make sure that we all understand what you're talking about. Next slide, please. Okay. So why use DSDM? So mainly it's because it's meant to complement other Agile approaches, especially at a project level, when there's a need for control of a project. So in some cases, it may be implemented partially, and in some cases may be implemented fully. For instance, and I decided just to use a few examples of projects that, because sometimes we tend to think only of the IT component as the project. So some of you might have worked on projects like BOPI, and you realize that BOPI is not only about the solution part of it, the IT part of it. There's so many other aspects to BOPI or BOPI, as some of you would call it. And some of you who are working in some industries, the telcos, you'll know that they run things like the summer campaigns. The summer campaigns, there's so many parts to this. It's a project that is run by many aspects or many departments. So it's not only the actual IT part that works. And even campaigns like Back to School, those of you that are in retail, you'll find that the project itself has got so many components. There's also there is that part where there's a solution that the developers have to develop, but there's stuff before that. Things like the application, if you want to apply for a home loan, for an example, you realize that as much as you can go online and apply for home loan, but there's a lot of other things. So what I like about DSDM, among other things, it's just it makes sense that we should be using DSDM, because we not only about Scrum in terms of the developing solutions, especially from a BA perspective. So these are just some of the examples why it makes sense for us to understand what DSDM is and realize that we actually are using it. Move to the next slide, please, Ruth. So the benefits, what it does is it concentrates on the strategic goals. So we're trying to marry two worlds here. We're trying to marry incremental delivery, but at the same time balance that against time, cost, risk, and quality. In other words, someone has to oversee the project in its entirety. So this is where DSDM comes in. This is what it teaches us from a business analysis perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, so what it does, DSDM, the concept of agility from a DSDM perspective, it says, let's just do just enough design upfront. In other words, we have the foundation phase before we go scrumming, before we go into that iterative phase where we develop iteratively. So we would definitely have to have that upfront. Sorry, the links, the messages are popping up and they're kind of distracting me here because I'm so concentrating on the screen. So we do not have to work. So we do not have to worry about the details at the foundation phase. So in other words, we focus more on the breadth than we focus on the depth, because you might think that are we not going back to the waterfall methodology? No, we're not. Here, we want to make sure that there is an upfront design, but it's focused more on the breadth so that we eliminate the risk of going in without any design whatsoever or getting caught up in the process while we are now in the Scrum or in sprints. So now we realize, things are not where they're supposed to be. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's quite a number of aspects in which we, and those of you that speak to me regularly will know that I'm one of the things that I love the most is the context diagram. So one of the things where we can actually get to a point where we have an upright design is things like we understand the high level scope of the project. And how can we understand the high level? By making sure that we know what are the impacted systems, we know what are impacted entities, we know what we need from them, we know what they bring to the party. So this helps from a solution architect perspective. It helps, move to the next slide, please. It helps with allowing or enabling the architects to come up with something like this. Although obviously these two things don't necessarily talk to each other, but I want to illustrate the concept behind, to say, if we understand the high level scope from a business analysis perspective, we understand the impacted areas, we understand the stakeholders we need to talk to, we can have conversations without going to the lower level. With the solutions architect, we can have conversations where they can start designing what we're looking for and give us a blueprint of a solution design at an architectural level. And you'll see when we go to the next slide that there's various layers to this that help us from a high level perspective. Next slide, please. Because we have to be mindful of the fact that when we talk from an organization perspective, there's quite a number of architectural layers or architectural levels or landscapes that we have to be fully aware of. One of them being the business architecture, and I talk a little bit more in the next slide about business architecture. But for example, here, where we talk about processes and activities, we have the information architecture, data modeling, references. So what we have to, all the way to the technology architecture. So these are conversations that are happening even before we get to the lower level of the project. And these are decisions. If you look at the application architecture, if we have enough information at a high level, to say, this is what we want to do, we enable the decision makers to say, do we have the capability, if you look at the technology architecture, do we have the capability to build this thing internally? Or do we have to go and outside and get the off-the-shelf solution? And we haven't started to gather detailed requirements, but with this, we're able to cover the bases. Next slide, please. You look at it from this perspective, in terms of when you look at a business architecture understanding. If we understand from a business architecture, and you can see that the IT capability, which we tend to focus on, is just a small piece, but there's so many aspects that the project touches on. The project has got to fit in with the strategy. If you remember why the DSDM is about, is making sure that we are aligned to the strategy. We also have to make sure that from a market perspective, we understand what we want to achieve. What is our model? What is our business model so that because if we understand these bits and pieces, we're able to answer the questions that need to be answered upfront, even before we start going all the way and into the project, only to realize that we're missing the mark. The regulatory landscape, I just use an example now of Popia as one of the projects that some of you might have worked on. And you realize that these are questions that have got nothing to do with the developer sitting down and writing a piece of code. There's so many aspects. There's the business processes that we need to talk to and make sure that they're covered. It's got nothing to do with the system, the business rules, etc., etc. All of these things show that if we understand them from a BA perspective, we're able to steer and influence the conversations upfront in the right direction before we go all the way. Next slide, please, Ruth. So let's just do a quick recap on Scrum. Some of you are quite familiar with Scrum because they are in areas that are doing Scrum. Some of you may not be as familiar, but the frustration or the danger, or what I'm trying to highlight here is we find that we are only caught up in this piece of the world where we are just looking at the Scrum from we day in, day out. We're doing all the ceremonies, we're doing very well, we have a product backlog, all the way to us writing the user stories. And this is a comment that I always find, when us BAs or general, so this is what I always come across, when us BAs generally, what are you busy with? No, this week I've written X number of user stories. I'm busy with user stories, etc., etc. I'm attending these ceremonies 1, 2, 3. But you never hear the conversations that should be happening prior to that, the conversations that I've alluded to in my previous slides, which means we are either not involved in those conversations or we don't know how to influence the organization to a point where we need to be part of those conversations. So this part is the right part because it's about incremental development of the solution. But the project, every project that we work on is not only made up of a technical solution. This is what I'm trying to drive, the point I'm trying to make. Next slide, please, Ruth. So you'll see, again, if we just quickly just go through Scrum in terms of what happens in the Scrum. You know, we have the product owner. Obviously, they're going to use their knowledge to make sure that there is that product backlog. We have the Scrum team that is made up of different role players, and then they obviously would agree in terms of sizing. Let's size this piece of work and let's estimate, let's make sure that it goes into the sprint. And we have the Scrum Master that will make sure that the ceremonies are adhered to. And then there's a sprint planning to say, okay, what goes into our next sprint, as well as the review. How have we done? Did we deliver? Did we overestimate? Did we underestimate? Obviously, as the team gets more experience, their estimation gets a bit more accurate, which is where we play. We play in this space most of the time. But here, the conversation is about there's a lot more happening outside of this space. And the reason why we have this conversation, and I think it's important that you guys feel you understand this enough so that you are taking this to your various organizations, to your areas of where you work, to be areas of to influence the process. Because sometimes I think we feel as BAs, we have no power to influence the process. Yet we have. Next slide, please. Okay, so the philosophy behind the DSDM, which I've already indirectly spoken about, is that every project that we undertake, it must be aligned to strategic goals. So we must always be in a position where we question, and we can't question when we are in sprints. It's a bit too late to question when in sprints. So we must question before the sprints. You know, the sprints for me, I call them production line. You know, you're just churning the user stories. So the philosophy here is we must make sure that whatever piece of work we're doing, which is project, we have to be able to tie back to the objectives or the strategic goals of the organization. And if we can't, we need to understand, we need to ask, what are the objectives and what is the benefit that we are going to get out of this? We have to ask, you know, sometimes people don't ask because they say, we just focusing on doing this. And I think the more you allow a situation to go on, or the more you say it's just going to continue going on until you start raising those questions. Next slide, please. So, and apart from, okay, there's also there's philosophy, there's the values. I've skipped the values, but I'm just more interested in the principles. So the principle of DSDM, and you'll see that these principles are aligned to some extent with the principles of Scrum or the principles of Agile. One of them is focus on the business need. So are we addressing the need? If we look at why are we doing what we're doing, if we look at how feasible is it, you know, we ask those questions, then we can be able to say, yes, we are addressing the business need. And delivering on time in a sense that now this looks at the project in its entirety. So it focuses on the overall project. It's not focusing on the IT component. It's focusing, if we are working on a Popia project, for an example, we need to look at this project in its entirety to make sure that it's delivered on time. What are the parts or the pieces that are moving? It also, one of the principles is let's collaborate, which is what Agile is about, which is what Scrum is about through all the ceremonies that we have in Scrum. And also, we must never compromise on quality. Now, this is where it becomes tricky, because I feel that if we go into the Scrum, or if we go into all the ceremonies that Scrum prescribes, because we're focusing on the user stories, and those user stories are not clearly elaborated. They're not elaborated because the framework is not proper. The foundation, remember, DSDM speaks of the foundation. which is your architectural design. If that architectural design is not in place, then there's going to be a compromise in quality. And we have then to build incrementally from the firm foundation. This is the firm foundation that DSDM speaks about, which is that upfront design that we need to make sure that the solutions architect know what we want to achieve. And obviously delivering iteratively. Now, remember, these are two methods that we bring together, because the Scrum, the sprints allow us to deliver iteratively. So now we're marrying those two and communicate continuously and clearly through those ceremonies that we're having in the Scrum space, where we then that encourage that conversation and communication. So we need to sharpen that. But the most important thing, demonstrate control. Now, you can't demonstrate control if you're not sure, you're not confident of what you're talking about. If you don't understand, when during the ceremony, you are asked questions as a BA, but because you don't have the full view, you don't have the full understanding, you won't be able to answer it confidently because you don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, for an example, as business. Whereas if you've been through the process before, or you've taken initiative to understand the big picture, you are able to demonstrate control. So these principles are quite important to me, because they can work as a way of guiding us as BAs when we navigate through the project space, to make sure that are we able to talk to all of these points? Are we able to tick all of these boxes? It's not okay. It's not sufficient to only be able to tick the box of, you know what, we're delivering iteratively because all my user stories are on time, if I can't answer the other questions. Next slide, please. So if you look at the life cycle of the DSDM versus Scrum, so like I've been saying, DSDM focuses on the overall project, which means it takes account of all the work required from the initial concept right up to measuring the benefits way after the sprints have been concluded. That's very important. When we are in a DSDM way of work, we are interested in the benefits realization as much as we are interested in the beginning of the project, from its feasibility. So how feasible this project is. And you can see that the Scrum is just a dot in the big picture, because it deals with delivery. Scrum is about delivery. Let's deliver this product. And that has got two parts to it. It doesn't capture the full spectrum of the project, because it's all focusing on this deliver. We have to deliver 14 sprints. That's all we're focusing on. As long as we make our 14 sprints, we've done the job. Obviously, it does use the product roadmap to some extent to align with the strategic direction or objectives. But the DSDM then goes beyond that. Next slide, please. I feel like I'm talking to myself. So this session is slightly frustrating to me.
No, we hear.
Yeah, okay. So again, if you look at the overlap between these two methods or these two frameworks, so you'll see that, thank you, Selvin. Thank you for confirming. At least it makes me a bit more happy to know that, I'm not, it feels like you're a DJ. Those guys have got such a tough job because they've got to imagine the audience in their minds. So they've got a different strength. Some of us, I like to stand in front of people. My colleagues know me. But anyway, I like to digress. Let's go back to what I'm talking about. Pre-project. So if you look at the DSDM has got these phases where the pre-project, and some slides actually unpack this further, but you have a pre-project, you have feasibility, and that feasibility then helps us to lay the foundation. And remember the foundation I spoke about. There's the foundation at various levels. The foundation at your architecture is very important. The architectural foundation is important. But at the same time, the business architecture foundation is also important, because we need to make sure that, do we have processes that will support this? Do we have, within business, do we have resources that will manage this once it's gone live, once it's post-production? Does it fit in? Is it in line? Does it talk to what we do as business? From a risk perspective, is the risk managed? Have we raised risk? What happens if this risk materializes? How are we handling it? There's so many other things that lie outside of the sprints. That is just part of helping us deliver the IT component to it. But you'll see that from a DSDM, we say, let's go full, I mean, let's from beginning to end, let's make sure that everything that we need to talk to is spoken to and it's addressed or is raised, even if it's not addressed. I was speaking to someone the other day about risk to say, risk is important that you raise it, but it does not necessarily mean that all the risk will be, what's the word I'm looking for? Will be mitigated. Sometimes business say, yes, this risk, we're happy, we can accept it, because it's got low impact in business. But at least it's spoken about. We know that this risk, it's a risk that has been highlighted, but is accepted. If I can ask now, unfortunately, you guys may not be able to respond, but if I can ask now, those that are in squads and in teams, do you even have sight of the risks in the project? Do you even know what's going to happen should this risk materialize? Okay, someone is responding clear. I'm good. Someone's responding that I include them in my user story. It's perfect. Yes, definitely. We have to make sure that we speak about this risk, because I can tell you now, if they materialize, the first person is going to be blamed. The PA didn't do the analysis properly. The next slide, please, Ruth. Okay. So, and to be saying there'll always be the risk residual. Absolutely, I fully agree. So if we look at the phases in DSDM, just to unpack the phases a little bit more, because I was speaking about them, just for you to be familiar with them. You may not necessarily be involved in all of them, but it's always important just to be familiar with all of them, because usually we are more involved in the evolutionary development, which is where we are going to the sprints. But you must realize that we have the pre-project. In this case is the conversations that are at very high level, talking about the proposals and maybe the priorities in the context of what other projects are happening within the organization. Remember, these priorities are not necessarily within that project, but then in context of what else are we doing in this organization. You may not necessarily be involved in this, because usually this is at a senior level, but at least it happens, and you should at least at the very least maybe ask, if you're not sure, ask about these things. And then you have the feasibility. The feasibility is where, in most cases, where business cases are being developed, because now we're looking at how viable is this project? We're looking at what are the costs versus the benefits of doing this project. We're looking at which route are we taking. Are we taking the off-the-shelf solution, or are we taking or building it in-house? Do we have, like I said, do we have the capability in-house? Do we have the technology? Do we have the skills? Because maybe this, whatever the pie in the sky that we have, maybe requires people that maybe have a Java skill. And in the organization, we don't have Java developers. What is the cost of hiring Java developers versus going off the shelf? And all those conversations. Remember, the time cost are part of the scope of any project considerations and quality. Also, then the foundation, which is critical, and I've been talking about the foundation. Now, this is where we establish that we have a firm understanding, we have a firm grasp of what we want to do. And we use techniques like the context diagram is one of the techniques that we can use to show that we have a firm understanding at a high level, because then we're giving our colleagues a common understanding of what we want to do. And we just to make sure that looking at this picture, does it address the need? Just as a picture, yes or no? And one of the things that you must realize at that time, is still very cheap to change. And we haven't spent a lot of time. We haven't wasted the company's money, time, and resources, because this happens within the first few, probably the first few weeks. We are able to produce a picture, because a picture is quite important. It drives the conversation. And then obviously, then after this, we're able then to go into the sprints to say, now we are sprinting. And after that, we go to the deployment, which then will lead us to post-project. But the post-project, the important thing that I want to highlight about the project is the benefits realization. 6 months down the line, do we look at the products that we have deployed? Because business said we need this thing ASAP, we need it now. because business, now we're in October. So people are actually realizing we only have 4 weeks before the freeze period. So everyone is trying to push stuff into production because they realize the calendar year is done and they need to account. So the business realization talks to, okay, you said after 3 months, you're going to have 100 customers. And 100 customers, we're going to make maybe 500,000 out of these 100 customers. Have we achieved that? If we have not achieved it, what are the causes? So that, and the reason why it's important, I'll tell you why it's important. Because the product guys do not necessarily focus on this. So that tomorrow they want to develop something similar. You can therefore hold them accountable by questioning them to say, but this is what happened and it didn't fly, or maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, let's look at what we built last time and tweak it, because maybe the point of entry was incorrect. Maybe the pricing was incorrect. Maybe the message that we're taking to the market was incorrect. There's so many other factors that we as business analysts should be thinking about and talking about, as just not only the user stories. We're just not just in the squads or in the tribes, to write the user stories. Let's move on before I run out of time. Let me check what time it is because we started late. Okay, so these are typical artifacts. You'll see that in your pre-project, this slide might be, I don't know how it's coming up on your side, but it just might be a bit smaller. But what would happen is in your pre-project, so you have, like I said, the NDA, the template of reference, because this is where we're kicking off. It may even be a concept that we may throw out of the window after we move to the next page, which is feasibility and foundation. Feasibility, we're looking at very different aspects of architecture, like I spoke to you about, together foundation, to look at, okay, what is our approach? What is our approach from a solution foundation? What do we have in the organization? Will it sustain us? Before then, and then obviously we go to that evolutionary development, which means us developing iteratively, and then we go to deployment and post-production, again, looking at what benefits are we getting out of this. It's very, very important that we have to question our stakeholders. I know sometimes it feels like we always have got to take instruction from business, but we must also push back with facts. Let me say that quickly, because people will just go and just push back. We argue based on facts. People that work with me know, when I put down a point, I substantiate my point, my position. We don't argue on sentiments. We argue on facts. So I would say, this is why I think this thing is not working, or this is what I think we should do because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are hard facts. And those hard facts, you can only get them if you understand what is going on. If you understand how the product is performing, if you understand the business. Remember, one of the slides I spoke about was just understanding that business architectural landscape. That it means you have a full understanding from the top to the bottom. We are able then to argue on your facts and say, no, this is what I think we should do. And we become business advisors more than just business analysts. Next slide, please. So typically, this is what you find in terms of the organogram or the structure, or how teams are made up. Let me put it that way. You'll find that, so orange here is just for business, where this would be the project layer, because every project should be run as a project outside of Scrum. Remember, Scrum is just product delivery. So, but then that product delivery should not be working in isolation. There should be the project team that is supporting that, because that project team, you have your business visionary, which if you look at it in detail, you'll find that business visionary could be the same person as the product owner, because they represent that they're making sure that whatever we're working on is in line with the business visionary or business vision and strategy. And obviously we have the sponsor. The sponsor would be that person that's obviously funding the project, that person that is senior in the organization that has got the decision to make, the power to decide if we're spending money here, we're going to spend money there, etc., etc., etc. And normally in some organizations, you'll find that then you have your project manager, which I think at some point it became a swear word that they're project managers. But the reality is these are projects. I think if you understand how to marry Scrum with projects, then we can realize that we can have project manager existing side by side with Scrum Masters, because sometimes the project, which can be even at a program level, has various squads which are made up of different Scrum Masters, but someone has got to make sure that they oversee the whole thing. I mean, those examples that I made, now you have your POPIA or that POPI Act. It's a huge program. So the delivery part is just a small part, which is the IT delivery. There are a lot of other parts that are moving. Someone needs to look at that. And all these parts. But now, how do you bring these two teams together? In some cases, it depends on the structure and the complexity of the project. Sometimes you find that there's one business analyst who is able to have both views of the world. It does become tricky, obviously, if there's too much work to be done, because it talks to that context switching. Sometimes you may find that the squad has a BA, and then at a project level, there's a PA at a project level. Now, the challenge around that is alignment. How to make sure that the BA at a squad level and the BA at a project level are talking and the handshake is happening in a way that is seamless. So those are some of the challenges that happen, but these are some of the structures, or this is a typical structure where you have a squad or you have a tribe or a Scrum team. That Scrum team will be made up of the skills that we know. But outside of that, there will be people that will be as and when needed. For an example, the business advisor, as and when needed, might be called in. The Agile coach, as and when needed, might be called in. If we need a workshop to be facilitated, we might call on someone outside of the squad to facilitate. Okay, so there's a question: what roles in this figure should participate on the strategic planning at a strategy level? So that's good question. So two roles. One is the business analyst would participate, but the business analyst working with the product owner. Remember, the product owner can also be the same person as your business advisor or the person that is wearing the business hat. So a BA and the product owner should always be aligned. They must work hand in glove, so that even if the BA is not in the conversations, because, okay, let me paraphrase that. Because in my experience and in my personal view, I think it's important to have the BA in those conversations, but it's not an automatic inclusion. Let me also quickly say that. And why it's not an automatic inclusion? Because the BAs tend to be too operational. We tend to be too operational in our thinking, and because we're too operational, we don't really catch the eye of the decision makers. Because remember, how you catch the eye is by the questions you ask, by the contribution you make outside of the Scrum teams in this conversation, to a point where they say, you know what, we actually need this person in this conversation. We cannot continue. Let's say we are in a strategy on a breakaway session. We need someone to represent the BAs. So I hope that answers that question. And I think this is my last slide. So these are some of the techniques that you can use. Yes, so someone is commenting there. Richard is commenting. Impact mapping is also a great technique to show how strategic goals are. Absolutely. So if you're not doing if you're not doing the context diagram, impact mapping is also another technique. So there's many techniques that you can use, but what's important is we have to make sure that these things happen. And sometimes in an organization, also let me say this from my experience, sometimes they don't happen because people don't really know what should happen. And they're looking up to us for guidance. But because we're not coming up with these suggestions, then those things do not happen. I want to advise you to say, you have ideas, you have views, you have opinions, you know how things should be done, or you have a sense that this thing is not going right. It doesn't help for you to sit in the corner and be unpleasant and be unhappy. I suggest put together a presentation even if it's 3 slides or 4 slides, talk to the manager or the person that you think is influential. You know what, I've got suggestions on how we can improve the process, or how we can improve the things we do here. This is what I have to say, you know, or can you arrange a meeting for me and the team? You present and people debate. You know, managers like people that come forward with suggestions. I can tell you now, you know, rather than people that wait for managers to tell them what to do. I think that time is long past. You know, we are all professionals. We are all intelligent knowledge workers. You know, I did my study knowledge workers, one of my degrees. So we are all knowledge workers, which means we have something to offer to bring to the table. So I suggest definitely take the initiative. In this meeting, I'm sure probably you guys are thinking, you know, environments better than I do. So please, I'm asking you, because this is how we elevate ourselves to a point where when the strategy session happening, then the decision makers say, you know what, actually, we need Peter in that meeting with us. You know, Peter, it's not that Peter is fortunate, because Peter has made himself visible. You know, we need Joanne to come with us. So these are some of the techniques that I want to advise you to actually start utilizing. And if you don't utilize them, maybe you know, you read up on them to see how can we use these things to depict what is spoken about, to have that common and shared understanding, and that will go a long way. Next slide, please. But I think this is definitely my last slide. Yes. So we have 30 minutes. So I tried to recover the time that we lost. So I'm happy to take questions or comments. Over to you, Ruth.
Thanks, Edward. That was great. I'll also just change the slide over to, if you want to read a bit more about you, that's there.
So yes, guys, I am very much active on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a place where I'm very active.
Great. I'm going to just go through and see if I can find questions that you may have already answered. I'll just check for you. Right, just to remind all of you, links and everything will be shared with you. So that's all there. It's all there. Everyone's here. We are here. Great. Yeah, just those comments about how people include risks, some of them in their user stories, which is great. Then there is one, I'm not sure if you got to this one, Edward. What roles in this figure should participate in the strategic planning and strategy level? I think you answered that.
Yes, I answered that.
Yes,
yeah, unless if there's a follow-up question on that one, but I answered that question.
No, I think that's it. And there was just the comment on impact mapping being also a great technique to show how strategic goals are linked to delivering value in our scrums. Just recordings again, yeah. So nothing in particular on the session. Yeah, so I don't know if there's anyone who'd like to be unmuted and ask Edward a question directly. I can unmute you if you'd like me to. Otherwise, just keep posting in the chat, and I will post those through or ask Edward to get the answers for those. Again, thank you very much, Edward, for tonight's session, and especially with the technical difficulties. I don't know how you managed that with me doing the slides and absolutely nothing on your side. It was brilliant. Just shows how you're able to function under pressure, which again was a very valuable trait. I don't know if I would have been able to do it. Excellent.
Yeah, no, but anyway, to that point, I just want to say, guys, life happens. Actually, I had a situation, I must tell you this, guys. I had a situation, I was talking at the IBA Summit, I think in 2017 or 2018, I can't remember. But what happened there was, as I was starting my talk, it was in Cape Town, I remember. So when the TrackChairs uploaded my presentation to their machine, some settings changed, and that setting that changed was the autoplay, something like that.
Oh gosh.
So I'm starting my talk, and the slides are running away from me, so it's unsettling. So you have to think on your feet, you have to have the recovery plan. So I had to remain calm so that that situation was resolved. Otherwise, it could have thrown me off completely. And I'm just starting my talk, so it's important that we realize that these things do happen. But anyway, having said that, we forge ahead, we move ahead, and thank you for the time. Thank you for listening to me. I hope this has kind of sparked some interest in terms of the holistic view that we need to have. We have to have that holistic view of projects. We have to make sure that we guide business. I think I really want to emphasize this one. We're not necessarily there to take orders. We are BAs because we are skilled in what we do, and we have a lot to offer. But that will not be given to us. Control is never given. Control is taken. So you must realize that control will never be given to you. You must just go and take it. And so take control, demonstrate control, like it said in one of the slides. Guys, I need to stop now. Otherwise, I'm going to talk forever.
Edward, I just want to say thank you so very much for taking the session for us. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And lots of thanks coming through from all the audience, Edward. Lots of informative talks, excellent talks. Thank you, Edward. One reminding someone how valuable a context diagram is. So thank you for that. So yeah, it seems like this talk went down very, very well, even under all that pressure of not having the slides with you. So awesome. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Keep well. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.